Hi, my name is Stephen Turner, and I am the president of Gesher Galicia. Welcome today to another Gesher Galicia podcast. Marla and Jay Osborn are both former directors of Gesher Galicia, and we welcome them today and thank them for being here for this podcast. Marla Osborn is currently the Jewish Galician Heritage Associate, and her husband, Jay Osborn, is the Digital Maps Manager, also known as the Map Guru for Gesher Galicia. They are the founders of Rohatyn Jewish Heritage, and they live in Lviv, but were visiting California when the war broke out, and they currently are still there. Marla received her Juris Doctor from Hastings College of Law at the University of California, San Francisco, following a BA in political science from UCLA with a concentration on Eastern European governments and political history. She has worked as a transactional lawyer in California, and for 2015 to 16 was a staff member working on Jewish heritage projects at FUDGE, the Foundation for the Preservation of Jewish Heritage in Poland. Marla was a Fulbright U.S. scholar for the 2019 to 20 academic year, conducting a research and demonstration project on Jewish heritage in Western Ukraine. An avid family historian since her early teens, Marla was one of the founding members of Alex Feller's Rohatyn District Research Group and has served on the boards of directors of Gesher Galicia and Remembrance and Reconciliation. She has written for many genealogy and heritage publications and has lectured at schools, meetings, and conferences in the US, Israel, and Europe, including in Rohatyn. Her husband, Jay Osborn, has a BS with highest honors in mechanical engineering from the University of California at Irvine and has worked for 30 years as a computer design engineer. He is named on more than 20 US and Great Britain patents for Sun Microsystems and Apple, and has worked in California, Europe, and Asia. Currently, he is responsible for historical map research and assembly for the Gesher Galicia Digital Map Group. The first map he assembled in 2011 was the 1846 cadastral sketch of Rohatyn for the Rohatyn District Group. Jay is an engaged proponent of the ongoing heritage program and serves behind the scenes as program manager for planning, documentation, logistics, and technical problem solving. I first met Marla and Jay virtually through the Rohatyn group, and then my wife Devorah and I visited them when they were living in Paris in 2012. Since then, we have been good friends. In 2018, Marla and Jay took my wife and I to Rohatyn, and that is an experience we will never forget. It was an extreme advantage for us to be with a map guru because Jay was able to find the house where my grandfather was born from the Gesher Galicia cadastral map. Walking through Rohatyn with Marla and Jay is an experience. We felt like they knew everybody. Their work is a tribute to Marla's family from Rohatyn and a gift to all other descendants of the shtetl. One can say that their work, along with Alex Feller's, has put Rohatyn on the map of the Jewish genealogical world. Let's get started. Thank you again.
Thank
Thank you,
you. That
Steve.
was a fabulous introduction.
Well, it's all true. That's what made it fabulous.
I'm weepy.
So how was it that you were in California when the war broke out?
We had this trip planned to visit my 87-year-old mom in Los Angeles. And the only thing that was standing in the way was COVID at the time. This was an early January trip that we set up, I don't know when, October, November last year. And so we landed here in California January 7th with 2 suitcases and 2 laptops and locked up our apartment in Lviv, leaving everything else behind, from clothes to books to tools to other computers. And figuring, we'd be back in 5 weeks. And by the third week, even though the war hadn't started, there was rumblings about it. And so we decided to postpone our return from February to March. And by the time we got closer to the March return, of course, war had broken out, and it was impossible to return at this point. And in discussions with our landlord, it was agreed and arranged by our landlord for a family of 4 that was fleeing Kharkiv. The father is a university lecturer at the University of Kharkiv there, and they are now living in our apartment in Lviv for the indefinite future.
Have you been able to stay in touch with your friends and associates?
Oh, absolutely. I
Yeah,
mean,
very much, very much.
So this is our primary focus now. I mean, making sure our friends are safe. There had been just tremendous hardship. Many of them have suffered. And there are half a dozen of them that we try and stay in touch with through Zoom, Skype, Facebook messaging, and otherwise on a daily basis.
Well, I think many of us are obsessed with the news coming out of Ukraine. And we at Gesher Galicia, we're posting daily updates of the news on our social media sites and stuff.
Yes.
But would you say that can you tell us something that the average person reading the news wouldn't know? What do you hear from your friends that would help give unique insight to the situation there now?
Well, obviously we see a lot of really horrible pictures in the news, especially from the east, northeast, and from the south of Ukraine. Where our primary focus is in the West, of course, has not been completely spared. First of all, there's the huge flood of refugees, internal refugees who are staying in the West and so on, plus others crossing the borders. What is not real visible, I think, especially for the supposedly safer Western part of Ukraine, is that many people are housing refugees in their own homes there and not necessarily discussing it. You don't see it in the news, but it's happening. The town of Rohatyn has swollen by 20%. So that's a clue of what kinds of things going on. And Rohatyn should be in a relatively safer area because there have not been significant strikes in the immediate vicinity. Of course, that's changing, that there was the missile strikes in Lviv, which is a town we've had some connection with through Holocaust history and so on, but also near your ancestral town of Nadvorna, Rohatyn was hit yesterday.
By a hypersonic missile.
Yeah, so that's only 10 kilometers away from Nadvorna.
And of course, the airport in Ivano-Frankivsk.
Right. So, but the thing is that a huge number of people and everyone we know in the West is doing something to manage the refugee situation, to try to bring supplies in from across the borders, that sort of thing. And of course, the news covers the destruction in the East and in the South and so on, but and there is some coverage of refugees who are crossing borders and the massive lines and all that stuff. We've seen, of course, film and pictures from the Lviv train station, which is being absolutely hammered in the refugee situation. But it's also essentially every individual in Lviv and in all the surrounding area. They're all engaged doing something to try to relieve the refugee situation, to find homes for people and that sort of thing. And our friends are housing people, strangers they don't know, who don't have a place to stay. And there's no photos of this going around, but it's a huge humanitarian effort going on.
Yeah, and I would like to add that Vasil Yuzishin, that Gesher Galicia has been touching base with, of course, he's a dear friend of ours and a team member of Rohatyn Jewish Heritage. We don't go to Rohatyn without him. He's our driver and translator and friend and activist.
He drove me to Rohatyn.
Exactly.
Right.
He just in this month has made 5 trips to move people and humanitarian aid to the border and back. He's absolutely exhausted. And in some cases, he made 2 trips in 24 hours. So, they're all, and that's in addition to maintaining a family of 7 people that he's responsible for, 3 generations in his household. I think that's very typical. The other thing I would add is, as more time goes on, and clearly the war is not going to wind down in any way anytime soon. Unfortunately, we are also seeing a certain level of sadness, depression, darkness that's coming to a lot of our friends who previously had tried to put a positive spin on, we'll get over this, glory to Ukraine, we will win, I'm not leaving. We've now had several friends this last week up and leave Ukraine, and they were a week prior insisting, I'm not going anywhere. And also,
is that men too, or just women and children?
It's mostly women, because men between the ages of 18 and 60,
Right.
unless they're responsible for 3 children, they can't cross any of the borders. And also you're seeing, for instance, the funerals of soldiers. So Rohatyn has already lost several residents, men who had gone off to fight in the east and have been killed. And the same with Lviv and Ternopil and Ivano-Frankivsk. And so as each day goes by, I'm more and more hearing about funerals. That is having, as you would expect, an incredibly dark, sad, psychological effect on friends that were trying to keep an upbeat note. And without mentioning names too, I want to note that a very dear friend of ours in Lviv lost their newborn baby this week.
Oh my God.
And the bombing, so, the recent Yavoriv bombings and the sirens so stressed the mother, who was due in 2 weeks, that the doctor decided to take the baby by cesarean last Sunday. So the baby was born alive, but by Tuesday, the baby had died. And this is the second child they've lost in 2 years. The first one was to COVID. So there's a lot of suffering going on.
Yes, there is. But I think one of the only positives that I could see coming out of this was that in the past, many people looked at Ukraine as 2 countries, the eastern and the western side, with the eastern being more Russified and speaking Russian, and the western side being the home base of more of the Ukrainian nationalist movement. And now one thing that Putin has accomplished is he's uniting the country.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jay.
It's an interesting comment, and we've certainly heard that and seen it.
And promoted it.
In lots of, especially Western press and so on. Interesting to us is that Ukrainian academics, including some friends of ours, have been trying to counter that perception of 2 Ukraines for a long time, but not very successfully, because there's a lot of inertia associated with it in the world consciousness and so on. But absolutely, so on the plus side, not only outside of Ukraine, but inside of Ukraine, now there's no sleeping ambiguity about these kinds of things. Ukraine is very united at this point. The unfortunate part of that is that they are united against Russia, and I'm concerned about the long-term, cultural problem associated with that. The Ukrainians in the West, where we live, have a long-standing, what should be anti-Soviet sentiment because of the horrors that went on there during the war and after. And of course, it's pretty easy to slide from anti-Soviet to anti-Russian. But now, it's going to take generations for this to heal. Even if there is a reasonable peace, and even if it comes soon, I myself am having feelings associated with this anti-Russian, sentiment. And it's really hard. And anytime you see this kind of cross-border, neighbor attack like this, those feelings are hard, and they last a long time. And
but maybe they could be more concentrated on one person and become an anti-Putin feeling rather than an anti-Russian feeling. And that's one way that maybe you could overcome that.
Yeah, let's hope so. That would be good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and then-
I think on this topic, it's interesting how much Zelensky has contributed to this sort of united Ukrainian identity coming out of this, because he himself is Ukrainian. He's also Jewish, but his native tongue is Russian, and so most of his news conferences since the war broke have been in Ukrainian, but he has spoken also in Russian, often when it's a message directly to his Russian neighbors, of what's happening in his country. So I think the fact that he embodies all of these historic and conflicting identities that is so typical of Ukraine is he's like the right person at the right time to be in this position.
Right. Now, before the war, he had like a 20% popularity poll, right? And probably in Western Ukraine was the lowest part, right? He was
Yes.
more popular in the East.
Yes.
Now, I mean, now it's through the roof. And this was a guy who was elected with over 70% of the vote. But I've had friends of mine from Latvia who said, well, look, before the war and any of the tensions, said, oh, look at us, we have a comedian as president. And now they're not talking like that anymore.
No, not at all.
The respect is unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, we got plenty of that kind of feedback before the war from friends in Rohatyn and Lviv and elsewhere in the West that, they were almost embarrassed that they had this president. But I see now regularly Rohatyners on Facebook putting up a picture of Zelensky and wishing him a long life and a giant heart and everything else. I mean, it's a radical shift, in my opinion.
Good. Let me ask you this. When you lived in Lviv, there are now air sirens all the time, okay? Do you know where your nearest bomb shelter was? Was it convenient? Would you call it a good bomb shelter?
Well, first of all, we are in our Lviv apartment is in an Austrian era building. It was built around 1907, I think. And there is a basement there. I have to say, never in a million years have I contemplated going down there. But I think about it a lot prior to the war because I have to pass it to go up the stairs. There's no elevator. And you have no idea how many times I imagined what it would have been like if this was wartime and I was Jewish and I needed to find a place to hide, and this rather frightening dark cellar unlit thing that I can see at the bottom of the stairs, and I didn't even have the courage to go down there. I suspect that's where our building is going now, but I have no idea what's down there.
Go ahead, Jay.
I was just going to say that Ukraine and even the city of Lviv regularly publishes information about where the shelters are for people who don't have something in their own building that they can use. And I intentionally have not looked because I don't want to think about it. I don't want to have to think about that.
We are aware of a rather trendy bar that's several blocks from our apartment that still has the World War II bomb shelter faded painted signs on it, and Areta Kowalska's Forgotten Galicia has done an article about Lviv's bomb shelter, World War II bomb shelters, but we've never gone in there.
And, frankly, the friends of ours who in Ternopil or wherever else who have had to spend night after night after night in the basements of their buildings, it's damp and it's cold and it's hard.
And they've been sick because of it.
And it's difficult. Yeah. So this.
And one thing that we can't forget, and I haven't really seen anything about this in the media, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. You have all these people huddled and squeezed together, sleeping in these poorly ventilated areas.
Yeah.
And you could only hope that, that COVID is not spreading in this area, but
there isn't even a mechanism anymore for vaccinating people, boosting people, and even data of new cases. All this stuff is not functioning right now. So nobody has a good sense of where we're at. Can't
Yeah.
be good.
Yeah,
Oh,
obviously
can't
people are having to rank, the dangers, and COVID now, unbelievably, COVID is a second order problem.
Right, right. Now, so I want to come to your work in Rohatyn from RJH, and what is going on with it? I imagine, nearly everything is on hold. Right?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's exactly correct. As you know, of course, tomorrow is the 80th anniversary of the mass killing of Jews in Rohatyn. There was to have been a memorial service at the mass grave site tomorrow. Clearly, that's not going to happen. We've canceled that. But as far as the practical work of caring for the cemeteries and the mass graves, yeah, it's on pause, to say the least. Assuming we are able to get back at some point this year, next year, whatever it is, we will pick it up again to stabilize things. It's, frankly, it's okay to let those sites rest and the vegetation to grow. We know how to deal with that. It'll be hard work to restart it, but that's okay. It's not so bad.
Actually, as a little footnote, it's ironic. 2 days ago, I got a Facebook message from a young woman whose she lives in Lviv, but her parents live in Rohatyn, and they found a Jewish headstone in their backyard. And this would have been a normal thing before the war,
Yeah,
that every couple
few
weeks or a few
weeks, yeah.
months, somebody drops me a Ukrainian message about a headstone, and we would make arrangements with Vasil to go in a few days and pick it up. To have something that was so normal for us such a short time ago happen now was completely dislocating for me. I didn't know if I should cry or laugh. I didn't know if I should write Vasil and even ask, burden him to call her and at least find out where it is. And somehow tell her, if your parents can't do something with it, just keep track of it, and whenever we're back, we'll get it. It was, but this completely what was a previously typical message and photo pop up on Facebook messaging for me now seems like a lifetime ago.
Yeah, we've got other interrupted projects as well. We were working on road signage to direct people to the Jewish heritage sites and to identify the sites with signs. We'd finally identified what looked to us to be a very good fabricator for signs that we could use to install those, and had started doing the design work to create the signs when we left in January, and said, okay, well, in 5 weeks, we'll pick this up again and get our first signs made in spring. Yeah. So that's off, but we can pick that up anytime if the companies are still there. If they're not, then we'll find some other way to do it, even if we have to import the signs or whatever. But so, the Heritage Project, while it's of course important to us and it's our core work there, it's not essential now. It's not the key thing. So we're trying to focus just on the important things of, trying to help take care of people.
Well, you mentioned the 80th anniversary of the massacre tomorrow.
Yeah.
I want to inform our listeners that Marla and Jay do not just stay in Lviv or to only go to Rohatyn. They go throughout Western Ukraine. They're traveling all the time. And you were able to, when they were doing this, follow their travels on Facebook. And then in October, before Sukkot, was the anniversary of the first auction in Galicia, which took place in my father's birthplace, Nadvorna. And it just turned out that Marla and Jay happened to be in Nadvorna at that time. And our Nadvorna State Research Group fabricated a monument to the victims of the Shoah from Nadvorna. And Marla wrote about the story of the fabrication of that monument in her Fulbright dissertation. And Marla and Jay happened to be, I called it was bashert, that Marla was there on that day.
For sure. I looked, we were right at the memorial, and I looked up at Jay and I said, what is today's address? Date.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it was that exact date.
Yes, yes. And so if you have ancestry, which I imagine many of our listeners do, and the surrounding areas, you should know that you have the four eyes of these two wonderful people on
Six.
your ancestral
In
heritage.
Hustle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So what are your plans now from uh, when hostilities will cease, or even while they're still going? What are your plans?
Well, this is the first time in our lives that we're incapable of planning more than a week or two or month out because we don't know. Obviously, we can't get back to Lviv, and so we've been bouncing around between friends and families' homes, which really we couldn't keep doing. So at the moment, we are in a temporary Airbnb in the San Francisco Bay Area. But we are now thinking that in May, we may fly to Germany and try and we can spend without a visa up to 90 days within the Schengen zone and try and make ourselves useful with the refugee issues and trying to get humanitarian aid over the border.
If we can do that without further burdening
Right.
the local populations who are already inundated.
So, I mean, we are taking very, very small bites. These bites by necessity can't be more than, a couple months at a time. And that's sort of the furthest out there, because after being in Schengen for 90 days, we would have to go out of Schengen for 90 days. And yet we want to, if possible, be close enough to Ukraine such that if things improved and we can get over the border and get back to our apartment and our things or somewhere, we would do that on little notice, but there's really no way to predict.
So in the meantime, since we can't do any practical work on our projects, we're doing what we can from a keyboard and a screen, which means sending money where we can send it to try to help the relief effort and the Ukrainian military, but also, side projects that are computer only. So some things associated with maps and those kinds of things. But it's, we had an exchange with Vasil over the last 24 hours, and he expressed the same thing that we are also feeling, and we think many, many people are feeling, which is it's very hard to do anything with your head right now.
Yeah,
it's just between the stress and the distraction, it's tough. So we do what we can with that. We're trying to figure out some way to, even though we're bouncing between friends and family and rental units and so on here until we go back, we're trying to somehow do something productive. And
yeah. I mean, even if
I'm sure you're succeeding.
Even if
you're doing everything you can, and that's all one could ask. That's all
we can do.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to feel pretty helpless over here and to feel very depressed too, because life goes on like normal here for most people. And by here, I mean California and the United States. But the good news is there are rallies we've attended, there are letters and petitions we have signed, and there are organizations and individuals that we've donated to, including the city of Rohatyn. They are accepting wire transfer donations, and I've posted on Facebook information about that, and also to the Rohatyn Shtetl district group. If for people who want to make donations specifically to Rohatyn, but there is dozens of organizations that are European and American based and in Ukraine that are accepting donations that really go to important causes, from caring for abandoned animals and shuttling them over the borders to literally feeding and housing people while they're in transition and transit.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you, Marla and Jay, for joining us today. And I want to thank our listeners for being with us. we at Gesher Galicia started an emergency appeal for Ukrainian Jewish Galician aid, and we are dispersing aid now to the areas in need. So there are a lot of good places to donate. We ask people who are considering donations to consider us also. And we are posting news updates that are different than what you see in the news media from people on the ground, and gives a little slant on things. So continue to follow our Facebook page and our discussion list posts for that kind of news. I think you should give Marla and Rohatyn Jewish Heritage a follow on Facebook and keep up to date with what they're doing. It's very important. And all I could say is let's pray for peace and glory to Ukraine.
Amen.
Thank
Slava
you.
Ukraini. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you.